refined. It's not a complete food. Brown rice could potentially be an okay food. So here's what we need to look at to determine if you would be okay to maybe have some brown rice. So under the yes column, we have if you're insulin sensitive. So if you've had some tests, if you're lean, if you're active, then it should be all right. If food is still scarce, then rice is not a problem, because rice, it raises blood sugar, you store away the excess, and you retrieve the excess. There will never be a buildup. There will never be insulin resistance if food is scarce. And that's, again, has been the case for most of the thousands of years that Asians have been eating rice, but it is no longer the case. If you have an active lifestyle, if you are young, and or if you do intermittent fasting, then rice is probably okay. It may not be optimal, it may not be the absolute best thing, but so it's an effective, efficient way to feed the world if food is scarce. So when is it not okay to eat rice? Well, if you're insulin resistant, if you've already developed insulin resistance, now your body is resisting burning that fat, and every time you eat some rice and you trigger more insulin, you'll increase the tendency to store more. You'll promote insulin resistance, and it will be virtually impossible to reduce insulin resistance if you keep putting in the carbs. So the rules have changed when you became insulin resistant. You can't look at a skinny person and say, oh, this person is doing this and it works for them, you need to do that and just work out more. It doesn't work like that. If there is plenty of food, if there is frequent meals and always a little excess, now rice is not a good idea, because it's going to trigger insulin, and insulin is going to make you more hungry. If food is plenty, you're going to eat more. If food is scarce, not a problem. If you have a sedentary lifestyle, if you are older, or if you eat 3 or more meals a day, then rice would not be a good idea. And I've saw some videos of some young people, some attractive, teenage, 20-year-old people who said that, oh, well, I eat rice and it's the natural thing for Asian and it's good for me. Well, that person hasn't gotten into this category yet. So sure, if you're insulin sensitive and active and young and so forth, then it'll take 10, 15, 20 years for you to develop that problem. And that is why we see these tremendous shifts in diabetes and obesity, because it takes a while to develop that problem, for it to manifest. So if we look at this problem on a more global scale, where are we heading? Well, diabetes type 2, which was basically unknown 200 years ago, now has 425 million people in the world have type 2 diabetes. And they are projecting that in 2045, that will be 629 million. And they think that most of that increase is going to happen in Southeast Asia, because that's where the largest number of people are, and they have just started this ballooning trend. Now, I hate to say this because I like to have a positive outlook on things, but I think that 629 million is a gross understatement, because we are just seeing the beginning of this trend. We are seeing more prosperity in the world. We are getting the entire world into the middle class and moving up toward better and better prosperity. We are seeing more and more processed foods, and we have more and more of these people who are already insulin resistant. So the way insulin resistance works, again, I've talked about this in some previous videos, that early on you are insulin sensitive. There's a balance between glucose and insulin. So glucose would be the blue one and insulin would be the red one. But glucose is a controlled variable. So 5 or 10 years later, the glucose is still the same because the body is working really hard at keeping it where it is, but insulin has gone up. because of all these factors, insulin resistance, multiple meals, processed foods. So it takes more work to keep the blood sugar down. But if we only measure blood sugar, we're not going to see this. And then 15, 20 years later, blood glucose is still okay, but it takes 3, 4, 5 times more insulin to keep it down. And then in the end, 15, 20, 25 years into the process, now we have type 2 diabetes. So when they talk about these numbers, the 425 million diabetics, I think we have 3 billion people at least who are somewhere in the process here. So again, I hate to be negative in that sense, but let's look at it positively. If we understand this, if we start understanding insulin resistance instead of just obesity or blood sugar, then we can start doing something about it. And this number doesn't have to get into the billions, but we have to change something. So rice has been a good staple, and it still works if you eat the whole brown rice and you're insulin sensitive, you're young, you're active, etc. But for most of the world's population, it is not a good idea anymore. Because in the US, for example, 87% of people are officially overweight. That means 87% of people are insulin resistant. There is probably less than 10% over in this group who are perfectly balanced, who have insulin sensitivity. The rest of the population are moving in the wrong direction. So is rice good or bad for you? Well, brown rice can be all right under certain circumstances, depending on you. White rice is barely better than white sugar, so you want to avoid it, except maybe a few times a year when you have a really good sushi. If you enjoyed this video, then I'm sure you're going to love that one. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.